Are my AirPods okay, or should I go corded?
All right. Thank you for agreeing to go on this experiment with me. Brian, we go back pretty far. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the basics were you subscribed to my 10 billion emails content a long time ago, which was
Yeah,
similar to what I'm doing now with my Substack. And then we just happened to see each other at Iterable Activate when you were speaking, and I think it was 2019.
yeah, 2019.
Okay. Amazing. And we basically just have kept touch for a variety of reasons ever since. I don't know, maybe once or twice a year, something along those lines.
Yeah, I remember signing up for your email course like back in the day. I was super pumped because I've been doing this email marketing stuff, life cycle stuff for a long time. And there's just not like a ton of there's content from companies, but like not a ton from practitioners who are doing this like day in and day out. So I remember subscribing to your thing and just being super excited like to learn from you. And then meeting you at Activate was cool, and we just stayed in touch. And I think we're running in the same direction. So super pumped to know you, and also just grateful for you to have me here today.
Likewise. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Running in the same direction. When you told me, I don't know, maybe 5 months ago, something along those lines, that you wanted to be a lifecycle marketing coach specifically, not only was it something I was attempting to do or start doing, but you kind of branded it more than you took it a little bit further than I had. And today we're kind of on the heels of you launching or relaunching your website, Automate, which we'll talk about. And so it seems to be like kind of two core services, one around more the training or mentorship or advisory side with the coaching. And then the other more of like the production or build out support. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, strategy and execution, getting it
Strategy.
done.
Well said. Okay, amazing. Before we like jump straight into that, do you mind giving a little context on your lifecycle marketing history over the years?
Definitely. So I've been a marketer for over 10 years. One key thing about my story is I actually got my start as a content and SEO marketer at a company called Autopilot. So within market automation space, lifecycle marketing software space, Autopilot is one of the players. So like if you have like the enterprise stuff like a HubSpot or Marketo on one side of the market, MailChimp on the lower end small business, Autopilot's like in the middle trying to serve lots of different audiences. It's called Ordo now, ORTTO, so they've rebranded. But I was teaching about this stuff. My actual responsibility was to do 3 blog posts a week, and I did that for 3 years. So I was burnt out on content marketing after that, man, just to be really straight up with you. And I wrote stuff myself, edited a ton, hired freelancers, but at the end of the day, just like 3 high quality articles a week is like it's hard. But the fun part is that it was like a crash course in getting to see how companies approach life cycle, thinking about this stuff every day in and day out. And having that foundation made it really easy for me to actually transition to being a lifecycle marketer myself. So after Autopilot, I convinced the folks at Opendoor that I could do lifecycle as a full-time thing, and did lifecycle there for 3 years. So Opendoor is a real estate platform, makes it easy for people to buy and sell homes. A lot more nuances to that, but that's the headline. Most complex lifecycle I've ever tackled and ever seen. So that was really fun to work on for 3 years. After that, I worked at a company called Titan. It's an investment platform. Basically, it's like your personal investment team. I was there for almost a couple of years, and then along the way, I would freelance on the side with a number of different types of businesses. I've worked with a travel app before, a couple of D2C e-commerce brands, and so I was doing the freelancing consulting thing on the side. And then after Titan, it made sense after like a decade of thinking about this stuff, doing this stuff in lots of different contexts, to do it as a full-time consulting thing. And it's been a lot of fun. But industry wise, I think that I've worked with B2B SaaS, fintech, real estate, D2C commerce. I love tackling honestly all types of industries and lots of companies. That keeps it a lot of fun for me.
That totally makes sense. And I'm curious if you could summarize why freelancing now? Why does that feel right for you where you're at in your lifecycle marketing career? And is it situation? Would it be the right company at the right phase would draw you back in, or is it you want to indefinitely do what you're doing now with Automate and with your own stuff?
There's 2 parts to it. the first part is very like personal in terms of I bet on venture-backed startups to like stock options, like the whole thing. And learning curve was great. Didn't have like a ton of material success in terms of stock upside and all of that. I mean, obviously TBD, hopefully there's some down the road, but I like the cash flow transparently that comes from consulting. So I want to prioritize that. The second piece of it is that I like having the variety of working with a lot of different companies and tackling a lot of different life cycles. What's cool about that, Drew, is that I can take learnings from different industries, different companies, different contexts, different teams, different tools. And it's a rising tide lifts all ships thing, is everything gets better. So I have friends who will just do like D2C commerce stuff or who will just do SaaS lifecycle stuff, and that's their specialty. And like I totally get it. And I get the reasons behind all that. I've thought about doing that myself, but like I can tackle those, but I have the most fun doing a variety of brands. So if the right brand were to come knocking, I don't know. I don't think I would say yes. I like the financial benefits of consulting and they're great. And then I know what life is like in-house, and I think I want to experience this life for indefinitely, see how it goes.
That's great to hear. Yeah, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but this this stuff that we do, life cycle, retention marketing, all that, like it can be the best. It can be in the right situation, the right sandbox, the right phase of the company. It can be like you can achieve a flow and stay in it and be doing most of the things that give you energy without a
Yeah.
ton, you can figure out ways to delegate the things that don't, but it can also be the worst. And it's all situational. But on that note, I'm just curious, for consulting, what are you finding, when does kind of like the fun stop, or when is the shelf life end for you, where it's naturally no longer needed or desired for you to be that consultant piece?
That's a great question. So I haven't had any clients churn yet. I'm sure that'll happen, but like theoretically, the way I think about life cycle is that actually the work of life cycle never ends.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is literally every company that I've ever worked with, there's always more work to be done. And so I think of it as just there's three big phases, right? Step one is just where you're at today. Step two is completing a V1, which a V1 is every single automation that you need to create throughout your entire customer journey is live. That's a V1. And then V2.0 is every single automation is tested and optimized and just humming. If you could look at it like color coded, V1 would be all yellow. Or like, let's say day one, it's red, yellow, green. Red doesn't exist or is not live. Yellow is it's live, but it's not optimized. And green is like, hey, it's live, optimized, really happy with it. V1 is all yellow, V2, all green. So getting to all green, you know this, like it takes years. It takes years. Like if you want to make 20 flows in the context of like, I don't know, a real estate startup, it sounds really straightforward and easy. Or if you want to do it in the context of like a Grammarly, there's just so many nuances that come from the actual production and build outs that the work can take years. And then there's so many levers and testing that you can pull, everything from the offer you do to the creative you use to the post-click experience to the channels that you're on, like messaging people through to the segments you're targeting. It's really endless. And so I do think when the work ends, theoretically it could never end, or you could call it done when everything's like all green. But I think for some companies, it gets to a point of diminishing returns. We're investing X in ROI or investing X in life cycle, and the Y in terms of ROI is like not there. So you can either like decrease your investment and shut it down. And there's just so many dependencies with that. But yeah, like the work is ever continuing in my view.
Totally makes sense. And one thought well, the additional reason for the whack-a-mole is also just the product and the brand is always changing too, right? So
For sure.
if there's a brand refresh or a very meaningful paywall change or product change, then there's at the very least an audit and an append exercise, but sometimes it can like materially impact the entire vision for the program.
For sure. I am a big believer in really good positioning, really good messaging, owning certain spots in customers' minds, and reinforcing that in every single possible touch point through lifecycle. And so even that, like if there's a rebrand or in a visual sense, like that's a big deal. But if there's like a positioning change, new audiences going after, that has very practical implications across the board for
Mhm.
conversion, for retention, for expansion.
Mhm.
And so as a company evolves, like a life cycle is going to continue to evolve as well, for sure.
Absolutely. Well said. Okay. I do want to talk about specifically lifecycle marketing coaches.
Sure.
Uh, because you and I, again, kind of came to a similar conclusion around the same time of there being a need for this. How would you define a lifecycle marketing coach? Why is now the right time for decision makers to consider bringing someone in like yourself to fill some gaps or to kind of like inspire new growth? Yeah, what do you see the climate for this at the moment?
Every marketer has touched the email channel in some way, whether that's sending campaigns earlier in their career or they receive emails from brands every single day. People feel this familiarity with it. So they feel like, I'm just going to say this straight up, like they feel like they know how to make the most of the channel. They feel like they know how to do it. And I think one of the big reasons to bring on a lifecycle trainer, lifecycle coach is they're going to help you see things that you are not seeing right now and to move past, hey, this is how to do email and the common knowledge of like, or and a typical conventional thinking, common knowledge around email, where everyone kind of assumes like everyone knows what to do. Let me give actually a couple examples. So I've had clients like ask me about like open rate. They'll be like, "Oh, my open rate is down. Should I be really concerned?" And or they'll be like, "My open rate's down. This is bad. Fire drill, fire drill, fire drill." Right? The bigger picture is like there's opens, there's clicks, and then there's downstream conversions. So when there's opens and clicks, and people are just thinking in that frame, and there's no thinking for the downstream conversion, opens and clicks may not translate to actual downstream conversion and therefore ROI of the program for the business. So someone who's experienced with this stuff will be able to point that out. But what's interesting about that is like every email marketing tool that you use out of the box, they're going to have open rate, they're going to have click rate, but conversion rate may require doing some fixes to get that in place, or even some stuff on your end with like a data warehouse, with a mode setup, with querying stuff, like whatever. But like that's an example of like, hey, if you're just focused on opens and clicks, like you're missing the bigger picture story. And I've met a lot of brands or companies that they're thinking in that way. So a life cycle person who's experienced with this stuff and can coach you in it is going to help you see past common knowledge thinking. Another example is I've worked in contexts where people are like, hey, we need to do SMS. And they're like, has a 99% open rate. And so, Drew, did you know that SMS has a 99% open rate? Oh my gosh, we should totally do it. So it's like, how do you navigate that conversation when someone comes to you and says, we need to do SMS has a 99% open rate. It's gonna crush it for us. It's easy to jump in and start doing something like that and say, hey, this is gonna work. Brands are crushing it doing this, but we know like there's a forest from the trees thing there. And SMS is like starting with SMS is actually not the best thing to do. And in my view, I created a framework. I call it moment, message, medium. And medium or like the channel is actually the last step in that process.
Mhm.
So just give me like a 10-second thing on moment, message, medium. So moment is the moment in the customer journey. Let's say someone just bought, as an example, someone has just bought from your D2C e-commerce brand, or let's say your B2B SaaS company. Someone has just signed up for your free trial. Okay, that moment, what messages make the most sense to send to that person for that particular moment? So you put yourselves in their shoes for that moment. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are they doing? What's different about your product? What messages can you send to them in that moment? And then you define that, you think about that. That's the real work of lifecycle, like understanding the context of the moment, digging deep into the messaging that's going to connect. And then the third piece of medium, it's honestly the last thing. I'm like, do we send this via email? Do we do this via in-app message? Do we do this via SMS?
Mhm.
And I like to ask that question afresh every single time, because within the context of a company, within the context of an audience or a certain product, there's always context, and context is so different for every single company. So the other framework I put into this too is I call it context and conversation. So understanding as much quantitative qualitative context as possible, and then from there just being like, what do we do? Like, I'm all for playbooks and stuff, but it's important. You can have those as tools in your toolbox, but what's important is you get all the context for a particular brand, particular moment and customer experience, and you're like, what do we do?
Mhm.
And then you talk about it, you riff, you have that psychological safety to be able to think through ideas, come up with stuff, and then you can come up with a high confidence list to
Mhm.
go through and test for that thing. So we started with, hey, if someone's like, hey, we need to do SMS, it's like, no, let's have a bigger conversation of what's the moment that we're trying to go after, what's the messages that make sense, and then does SMS make sense for that context? So lifecycle coach, connect the dots, lifecycle coach, lifecycle trainer will help you move past that siloed thinking to a bigger picture framework thinking that then enables you to think about the context that you're in, the context of your product, audience, etc., and then I have real informed conversation about what's the best for your audience, for your customers, for your brand. So those three things together, moving past the common knowledge, moving past like these kind of set mindsets of like what'll work, and then figuring out the context of your thing. I think someone who knows this stuff really well and has had all these conversations and also felt all the pains of doing like kind of stupid stuff or stuff that we know won't work and seeing that it doesn't work, they can bring that wisdom to your team, and that can make all the difference in your downstream metrics for conversion, for retention, for expansion, for the delightful experience you want to create for your customers. It can, even one piece of advice or insight can make all the difference.
So well said. I love the framework. I agree with the order of operations. And that was a bunch of great examples of the value of bringing in an expert like yourself to show that forest from the trees, and also to save people a lot of time and point them in the right direction. I like to say, like, hitting the beach ball in the right direction of just like, where should our investment be? It's something I'll find myself saying a decent amount recently is, let's agree on the what before we talk about the how, which is kind of what you're talking about as well.
Yep. Yeah, I'm curious, what would you say for why lifecycle coaches, lifecycle trainers are essential for teams right now?
It's a case by case basis for me so far, and sometimes what that looks like is a very low touch, low cadence. Like, I have one client who's 1 hour per month, and it's very zoomed out, and they are leading lifecycle marketing, maybe in the middle of their career. They're a people manager for the first time. They're scaling and they're running into growing pains. So
Hmm.
it's from that perspective so far, it's a lot of discussions around roles and responsibilities and trying to get an optimal org setup that scales. How do you empower everybody and make sure you're not stepping on each other's toes, for example, and make sure that they actually love what they're doing and don't feel like it's, too generic. And then the challenge is, like, I know you responded, this resonated with you. And again, we'll get into this more, the best of times and worst of times, but one of those themes was the reactive nature of what happens as companies grow, and the services component of being a lifecycle marketing team. It's I
Yeah.
think it's inevitable in most aspects, but the scope varies from company to company. So that is a really difficult challenge to solve and get out of, like, get directly out of. And so that can really affect morale. It can affect time spent on higher priority projects. It can really be a hard process exercise on how you solve for what is a variety of quality and scope. But yeah, so the once a month cadence and mentorship, like, honestly, if we met 2 times a month or 4 times a month, it probably wouldn't be nearly as effective because we would end up getting too much in the weeds. This way, it keeps it really high level.
Got it.
So I like that, but it's certainly not going to, keep the lights on for me fully doing one-to-one once a month. And it's not, that's just one example of where it's effective. The other scenarios are like with Grammarly, I'm back as an advisor and I'm actually giving them most of my capacity these days. And it's a variety of special projects as oftentimes not even the DRI, but as a supporting mentor. And it's really like poking holes and making sure that the way we're attacking a problem is going to get the desired result and like the highest impact possible, challenging folks to take bigger swings, which is a huge one. And then cross-functional, this kind of get into the same theme, but cross-functional collaboration. When do you need a consensus opinion? When should you ask for forgiveness later? Or, what is an MVP? Yeah. What is this even an appropriate, like that kind of stuff, pattern recognition, helping people basically avoid years of learnings and mistakes that you did, like up-leveling them faster. That's probably the best way I can say it is like what advice would I give to myself in their position? How do I relieve some pain and inspire them to just take those bigger swings?
That's so good. That's so good.
But yeah, it's a lot of fun. And the other aspect is I don't know how you feel, but like there are just some things where I left it out on the field. I left it all on the field. I don't have any energy to be executing on certain aspects of this role anymore. Mm-hmm. I would just be banging my head on that. Like I would have no motivation to go from A to Z on another email campaign, to do that coordination, to write the creative briefs, to hit send. Like I loved it when I was in it, but now I'm done, man. I'm done.
Dude, I totally hear you. I still like, that feeling when you're about to ship an email to, I don't know, like 1 million people, or like you're about to turn on automation that's going to scale to everyone that comes in the door at your high growth startup. That never goes away. I still feel that kind of like anxiousness, that little bit of fear every single time. So it's definitely tiring work. So many moving pieces, as you know. And like, I don't know, even if someone's like, hey, let's just send an email campaign, there's a lot of steps. It's not just like, hey, go in, this will take 30 minutes. Yeah, sure, if you want to ship like the worst thing possible. But if you want to get everyone aligned and ship the best thing, it's like stuff takes hours, stuff takes days, So definitely hear you. I still kind of like being in the weeds, man. It's weird. We've been doing it for so long. I have a new client who's using HubSpot. Never used HubSpot before. Like I've used Klaviyo, Intercom, Braze, Iterable, like Ordo, you name it, right? HubSpot, never touched. Obviously, I've known about them for forever. My job is to figure out how to make a dynamic email on HubSpot. And I'm like, this is great. So I'm like writing their support team. I'm like, how do I make this dynamic email? Can you send me some documentation? How do I call this endpoint? Blah, 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 blah. And it's like, it's just, I don't know. It's fun just being able to figure it out, I think.
That's fantastic. And that's why I'm going to keep referring clients to you, Brian.
Appreciate it.
Okay, I'm a first-time Restream user for an interview, so I'm going to try to share my screen real quick because I want to show off your new website.
Ooh, thank you.
Oh, wow.
Let's do it.
Let's see.
We're doing it.
Okay, so you're seeing your homepage at the moment, correct?
Yep.
So first off, how long ago this launched? I don't know, or this refresh for you. Automate launched maybe a month or two ago?
Yeah, so I launched in February. I think the website was done probably like a month ago. I haven't even put it anywhere yet. I haven't posted on LinkedIn. I just like have randomly sent it to people. I'm gonna I have my email capture set up. I gotta write my first initial like welcome thing. I want to get that in place before I like announce it and all that. But yeah, one of my friends who I worked with at Opendoor, he's a lead web designer at GitHub. Close friend, freaking love that guy. He's I look at his dribble because I'm a fan of him, even though we're friends, right? Anyway, worked with him to design this. I was like, hey, I want tech people to like it. And then so he made it. That part's cool. This was fun. See those little pictures? Those are actually videos.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to make it look like an Instagram UI. Like if you click on that, like a little video pops up,
Mm-hmm.
testimonial. And then, yeah, so I got a couple of those because I wanted a nice personal touch. And then the other parts of the site are cool too. So this is the homepage that kind of gives the overview of everything. But I have a SaaS specific page and an e-commerce specific page. What's significant about those is that you'll see a lot of fluff content everywhere with lifecycle stuff. I get it. I was a content marketer at a marketing automation company. You have content marketers who are trying to write about this stuff to get traffic and get leads, but I can tell when I read content, like, okay, they haven't done this before, and it's not a knock. That's a bigger conversation of like content marketers writing about stuff that they maybe haven't done themselves. We don't need to get into that. That's a whole thing. But I like to make it super simple. It's like, what do you need to build? So for SaaS, I'm like, out of these flows, this is my running list of SaaS automations to make. I'm like, hey, the job of Lifecycle is to just make these for your SaaS company. Or for e-commerce, there's patterns in e-commerce and typical automations and flows to make. It's like, what do we got to make for yours? That's it. But there's this other bucket, and I think which is your experience at this, I'm experienced at this. I'm calling it, I don't know a good word, maybe you can help me with the framing. I'm just calling it custom life cycle right now.
Mm-hmm.
So a brand like an Opendoor, a brand like a Titan, there's no playbook for those. For
Mm-hmm.
SaaS, there's a lifecycle playbook. Like I have it right here. I made it, right? For e-commerce, there's a lifecycle playbook. Myself and a bunch of other people have made that as well. But for like a Grammarly, for an Opendoor, for a Titan, like what's the playbook? Like there's no playbook, right? So I made a playbook for ones that don't have a playbook, and it requires more work. It requires more discovery of a brand, and then figuring out like the custom life cycle to build for each brand. And so that's the other piece that I haven't been able to articulate on the site yet, but I'll do it at some point. SaaS thing has been done. E-commerce thing has been done. Custom stuff is really where I think there's a big gap in content and a lot of education that needs to happen.
And so everything you said makes sense. And no, I don't have a better term for custom lifecycle. I like that. I just want to give, I know you gave kudos to the guy you worked with, but like this is one of the best, if not the best, polished solopreneur site for lifecycle marketing I've ever seen.
Thank you.
Well, and I love the, the clear dichotomy here really quickly on like those two core offerings. The emails you're showing look beautiful. And so while you're right, there is a playbook for a lot of like D2C e-commerce stuff and SaaS to a certain degree, certain companies. I'm going to stop sharing now. Let's see. I imagine it's attractive for a lot of, let's just say startups right now around like Series A, pre-seed or whatever.
Yep.
They've got a few options. One is they can try to go to Upwork or something like that and review portfolios of up and coming talent and kind of take a chance. Or they can hire you with over 10 years of experience to not just do the strategy, but also, as you said, do the execution. And because you have such, like you're a veteran, you can execute on that more quickly, and you might be reusing some templates, or like you're not like starting from scratch every single time, which is frankly like the right perspective. That's an advantage. So I imagine where the point I'm getting to is you might pay a comparable amount but get a higher quality, more scalable system from the get-go. And the fact that you have such a broad roster of platforms that you do have hands-on experience, like for me, this is more situational because of a long tenure at Grammarly, but over the last 10 years, it's really only Salesforce Marketing Cloud, Iterable, MailChimp that I have direct hands-on experience with. You have to go back further for any other vendors. So, you've got like, it looks like 6, 7, you're working on HubSpot. So that's also really nice. It sounds like it's turnkey for certain scopes of work for you to be able to basically do everything.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a couple of things with that. There's agencies that can do the basics, right? I realize what people pay me for and the clients that would pay me for is to like, what's next? What's the advanced thing? And then I can do all of the, and you can do this as well. You did it, Kramer, like all the programmatic stuff, like the dynamic email reports and all of that. I freaking love those, man. I love those because they're so valuable because the content is ever changing, ever dynamic. And the reason that that's significant, it gives you a reason to stay in touch with people forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's continuous value add as opposed to just marketing emails, just trying to get people to come back. Like it's personalized information. So I love that stuff and it's complicated, it's technical. You know how to do it, I know how to do it. I love working on that type of stuff. The other piece is like I mentioned my background is in content marketing. I actually write the first pass of every email that I end up doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll write the first pass of copy, and the reason that that's significant is it's not about copy; it's about the concept, right? There's a foundation of like, hey, for onboarding, people typically do this, but where the value is the question of, okay, how do we push it?
Mm-hmm.
What can be better? What content will connect? Is there a stronger concept here? What's every single lever we could pull in the creative that would drive conversion? And being able to pull from just a whole history of that and actually knowing how to write stuff and working with design. I've worked with tons and tons of designers on email stuff. So I know the capabilities, constraints, work with dev on all this stuff too. So pushing it in the concepts is where the value is.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of the technical programmatic stuff is also where the value is too. So I don't just write a brief and pass it to some in-house creative team. I'm like, hey, here's a pass of the whole series. How can we make this better?
Mm-hmm.
And like, so that's just a unique thing that I realized was unique. And it's just something I've just always done. I didn't know it was special. I just like have done it. And then I realized it was like, oh, this is unique. It's like the creative aspects of life cycle, the concepting piece of it is something I one personally enjoy, but two, like I'm good at it and it adds value to clients. So I'm like, okay, great. This is a unique thing that I offer too.
A really great point, and it's reminding me of something, which is I was the same way. Like for many years, it was by default at Grammarly. I was kind of like a team of one for a while.
How did you do that, man? I've been meaning to ask you about that. I've heard you talk about it. I've read your story a bunch, and I'm like, that's just so much.
It's I should be careful because I don't want to minimize the shared resources that were, like a designer and
Yeah, team effort for sure. I get it.
an
Yeah.
agency and eventually a copywriter. But so that's we'll have to follow up on that conversation because maybe you can interview me and I'll give the story. But where I'm going with this is I think the best programs come from someone who does have that full ownership mindset of like an auteur to a certain, like I'll make an analogy of the movie industry, but a lot of times like you've got these directors that are writers, directors, and they're doing other things. And you could say that's a control freak or, somebody that, can't let go. But in my opinion, more times than not, someone that's doing that, especially when it's a lean organization, it's because they have a strong vision and they just care a lot about the end result and the customer experience and so on and so forth. So where I'm going with this is what I used to do was either I would write the copy like what you're saying, or I would do wireframes, which I think have become a lost art for email to a certain degree, or I do both actually, kind of like a wireframe and a copy stab. Because I'll give you an example. Before Grammarly had a freemium model, when I first got there, we were just about to switch to freemium. It was a pay only, but we had a free trial. This was back in 2014. On that 7-day flow, I think it was 7 days, if I had just asked a copywriter to do that, we would have missed some opportunities. And one example is I realized what we're really trying to convince people from a strategic standpoint is Grammarly worth the price? Like I came in for one specific use case, I finished that project, or maybe I found a competitor. Is Grammarly really worth this $140 a year price? And we happened to have a blog article. It was about 8 months old, but where we did a study with a college, and it was literally titled, "Is Grammarly Worth the Price?" And so on like the day 2 email, the first nudge, like I found various ways to include that content in the flow, and it was the number one clicked. Even if we put it at the bottom in a small little like text link, it was the number one click, and it would lead to conversions, because that is ultimately the question that people are thinking in their head. And a copywriter 9 times out of 10 isn't going to, because this is not their scope of responsibilities.
Yep.
They're not going to necessarily go out of their way looking for needles in a haystack to solve that problem. They're just going to give it their best attempt to be persuasive within some guide, within a few paragraphs or less, or something along those lines.
Yep.
So long-winded way to say, that's why I cared so much about, maybe it was 200 plus emails plus campaigns that I did over my time that were automated or, programs started, and Grammarly,
Yep.
Monday emails, Grammarly Insights, all the copy, all the features, was because I just cared more than anyone else, because it was my baby, and I understood the problem we were trying to solve more than anyone else, because I was, obsessive about it.
Yes. Yes. That's the work. Like, that's the work of the lifecycle marketer. Like that email where you were like, hey, is Grammarly worth the price? Just that insight, like that's the work. In my view, writing the copy for something, anything, it's malleable, right? I can go change copy right now, anywhere. It's easy. You just go on the keyboard and type it, right? Like, it's not a big deal. The real work, the real meat, and that's not to discredit writers. It's been done a million times, but you know what I mean? The work is like, is this the right thing to even say in the first place? Is this the question people are asking?
Yep.
And if you nail that, the creatives can go crazy on that. You can go crazy on that on copy. You can bring that to life. And one other thing that stood out to me from your story is that blog article from 8 months ago, you knew that existed. And I'm sure you and I could riff a bunch. I'll just say this, of like, lifecycle person, I view the lifecycle job as knowing the customer experience inside and out, creating this like wonderful, seamless, cohesive experience across every single channel, and then automating it. And it's at its best when content, all of the content that the company has, the product inside and out, all of the use cases, all of that. And then you can bring that to life, like through these messages. Cause like you and I both know that like lifecycle is at its best when it's completely in line with product. Mm-hmm. And lifecycle is also at its best when it's completely aligned with product and content, right? Mm-hmm. I'm working on a series right now. I'm working on a welcome series for a B2B SaaS client, and we're incorporating a lot of their top performing content into it. There's always content that can back up a message, inform a message, put language to things that you maybe don't know how to say. And like, it's the job of the lifecycle person to know all of that stuff, right? And like, that is the mental load of being a lifecycle person. You got to know the product experience inside and out. You got to know the content inside and out. You got to know the customer journey inside and out. And like, it's a lot, but that's the work. Mm-hmm. And then taking all of that and translating it to a moment and to the right with the right message, that's the work. And like that, you articulating that whole story of like the thing people were asking, like that's totally it, man. That's a great like slice of, yeah, that's what we do. That's what we do, and that's what makes it valuable.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I'm glad that resonated. And also to your point about copywriters, whole other tangent, but I do think from a creative standpoint, copywriting, like nailing that is such a massive impact and so valuable, not just for the individual email or touch, SMS, it could be in product messaging, whatever, but for the just trust building, brand sentiment, delight. I'm a decent copywriter, but I don't come close to the quality of some of the people I've worked with. And they've been my favorite people to partner with in my careers copy and design, the creative folks.
For sure.
But yes, apples and oranges. We're talking about strategy and overall content goals versus the actual execution of the copy.
Yeah, I think what I mean is like, A lifecycle person should be able to figure out the concept. I'll write terrible. Literally, Drew, I'll just do sketches on paper. I'll be like, let's make this. And it's literally a sketch. The copy will be like 40%. It's an F. It's an F minus, right? But like it's directional. The goal of that phase, the concepting phase, is direction and hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Direction of like, is this concept strong? Hierarchy of like, how do we want to structure this email? What should get the most attention? What visuals are good? What messaging is the strongest to lead with? What should be the biggest? And then from there, if you can start the conversation with 40%, work with a copywriter, get it to 100, golden.
Yep, love it. Earlier you mentioned something about like figuring out what's new, and Klaviyo seems to be having a moment over the last few years. I assume it's deserved, and from afar it kind of reminds me of the early days of MailChimp, when it was just like it was the tool that anyone with a side project or a smaller to medium sized brand wanted to use because it was fun and easy to use.
Mm-hmm.
And they spoke to marketers, and like they were one of us. Is it similar with Klaviyo? Like what is I see a lot of D2C brands. It's like the go-to platform right now.
Mm-hmm. I think the thing about Klaviyo is we're seeing the fruit of what it looks like when a brand or piece of software completely takes over a particular niche or industry. So if you talk to anyone who does e-commerce, email marketing, they're literally either use Klaviyo or they've chatted with Klaviyo. And mad respect to them. I think like with MailChimp, that story, it's like if you're a small, I think they were so early that it wasn't even like if you're a small business, you should use MailChimp. It's just that if you do email marketing, you should use MailChimp.
You're right. Yeah.
Like that's how early they were. And I did it back in the day. And literally I didn't know anything else. I just knew there was a MailChimp. That's great. So I think like even tools that we know and love, it's like if they can serve multiple audiences, the difficulty there is it may not be the perfect fit for, like, how do I put this? Like if you're a D2C e-commerce brand, literally asking a marketer, they're gonna be like, you should go use Klaviyo. But if you're a B2B SaaS company, who do you use? You have options, right? Like you have the Iterals of the world, you have Iterable, you have Customer IO, you have Ordo, like you have options. I would never recommend Klaviyo for a B2B SaaS brand. I just won't. But any e-commerce brand, I'm like, okay, go use Klaviyo. Like it's built for it. You use Shopify, perfect. The integration's great. So I think what we're seeing is the fruit of like they own the e-commerce email marketing space. And this is what it looks like at scale.
Good insights and recap. And then one follow-up here. I've noticed a lot of new approaches for almost like an agency model, and there's one called Winback, which is new, and they're working only with Klaviyo and Shopify programs at the moment. Great guys out of New York, really smart, where they are basically asking for the keys to the castle for your dormant, churned users, and they are going to go in your system, and they've created templates and tactics for winning back, and they charge you nothing up front. It is a rev share. This is what I'm getting to. It is a rev share.
Oh, dang.
So basically, let's say pennies on the dollars, you pay them a commission for anyone they win back. And so what I'm wondering is, and I'm seeing this a little bit more, and I thought I flirted with this idea a year or two ago, and I never brought it to market. Is there going to be a Klaviyo-like platform that launches that has no hard costs built in, but they integrate with your checkout and you simply pay them commission? It's an affiliate platform deal?
Super interesting. I've seen those models as well. Here are my initial thoughts. Let's talk about attribution. So if you're doing e-commerce and marketing with Klaviyo, out of the box, their revenue attribution is a 5-day open attribution window. What that means, if you, Drew, get an email today from Brian's leather sneaker company and you open it today, if you buy 3 days from now, the revenue from that purchase is attributed to the open that you made today, even though it's 3 days later, and then all the way up to 5 days. So what's interesting is that when Klaviyo made that decision as the default, it has ripple effects throughout the entire industry. I get that other attribution windows are different, like 30-day view through for like ad platforms and stuff, talking about email specifically. So what a 5-day open attribution window does is I actually think it's very, very generous.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side, you have like Google last click attribution. So like someone gets your email, they click, they buy, it's attributed to the transaction, the amount are attributed to that last click. I think a true view of attribution is in between those things,
Mm-hmm.
because I do credit opens for purchases, but I don't think I would go as far out to say 5-day open attribution window. I think it's very generous. Last click, I think last click doesn't incorporate open rates, and we don't need to get into machine opens and all of that jazz. It just complicates this even more. But
Mm-hmm.
with last click attribution, it's like someone could have opened, thought about it, and then went and bought later that day on their phone. So I think there's underreporting with last click attribution. I think there's over credit with a 5-day open attribution window. So sorry, Klaviyo people, if you're watching this. So I think the true thing is somewhere in between. The way it relates to this model is I'd love to talk to these guys. How are you pricing this? If you're making money off of the 5-day open attribution window from Klaviyo, you're crushing it. I pulled these numbers for D2C commerce brand I worked with the other day. Our Klaviyo numbers are literally like 10x the last click Google stuff. 10x, man. If I'm gonna get paid off of a 10x number off of a 5-day attribution window, sure, why not?
Right.
but also the attribution and how it's calculated would just have to be front and center. And honestly, like I don't know what would make everyone happy. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think it's a moment in time thing, and I imagine their clients are mostly stretched thin, not necessarily doing database management in a very sophisticated manner. So it's like, oh,
Yep.
we have a team of one or two, or we have less than one person on the email channel, and we hit some of these leads 50 times over six months, and they didn't purchase. So we just felt like, enough was enough. But my guess is it's mostly for them just this sweet spot of no capacity. So why not give you the keys? And we're not seeing any other opportunity come our way that is as compelling at the moment. So it's just opportunistic.
Yep. That's a good point.
Fascinating trend. Okay, I want to be respectful of your time, Brian, but I wrote yesterday. It's actually had a really good reaction both on LinkedIn and on my Substack. I think I hit a nerve of, and this is happening in social media too. It's not just lifecycle marketing, right? Like I see, and I empathize with social media managers. Like Threads just launched, and it's like, oh no, another channel we need to have.
I know. We need to manage this too.
We need to manage, but it's in a different way, different complexity, different headwinds. It's happening with lifecycle marketing, and it has been for a while. It's like, oh, you're just email. Now you're multi-channel. Now you're engagement and retention. Now you're a growth marketer, and you're also the brand steward, and you're the one in charge of the direct relationship with the customer at scale.
Yes.
And your IT support, and things break, and you don't get holidays off, and all of these things, right?
Yes.
But now there's layoffs happening, and so it's like, on top of all these things, there's more inherent pressure and or maybe less resources, less investment. And with the remote work aspect, I think we've seen more creep from it's probably like multiple variables driving it. More creep from product teams getting ownership, growth teams getting ownership, content teams getting ownership. So many cooks in the kitchen with the lifecycle marketing teams that they're just managing distractions left and right, and there's not a lot of space for them to just do their job. That's my observation.
Yeah, I loved your Substack on this. I think thing number one is that there's always 3 roadmaps that a lifecycle team is juggling. Number one, whatever OKRs you've been assigned with to try and hit. That drives like, hey, we're responsible for this. We got to do it, right? The second thing is you have product managers, you have other growth people who are like, I have an idea, or we have a new feature, or we have this initiative, and oh, like we have all these people in our database, like we should tell them. And then that interaction with lifecycle, there's their roadmaps. So lifecycle is executed on their roadmaps. And then the third one is just if a lifecycle team's up to its own devices, what would they do? What would their roadmap be? And so I see those three roadmaps that we're continually juggling. When our work just becomes of the work of other team members, there's so many things that get lost in the mix. You mentioned this earlier, how at Grammarly you were like closest to the problem. You were closest to knowing what people needed for that part of the life cycle. The thing about good life cycle people is that they know customer experience inside and out, they know product inside and out. They know everything that's sent every single moment of the entire journey. So if you have like a product person who comes and they're like, we need to send this to all these segments and to this people and we're testing this thing. It's like in the back of the lifecycle person's head, they're like, wait, we sent X, Y, and Z and it says this, and other people were receiving this and we have this going out then. But the product person just wants to hit their goal, right? So there's misaligned incentives or misaligned goals and metrics. The most frustrating thing in the world is when a product person comes with like, hey, we wrote this email, can you just send this now? And it's the worst thing ever because a lifecycle person has all this knowledge that they need to contribute and they have to ship the best thing, even for simple one-off sends that are random tests, right?
Yep.
So conversation needs to go, here's lifecycle's metrics, here's lifecycle's job. Now, what does that mean for how we operate? Yeah.
I think it's going to get harder before it gets easier. And I don't really know how this is all going to evolve. Someone like a lifecycle marketing coach can help come up with some, maybe not pain relief, but vitamins. When times are good with a company, it tends to people give you, like when you're just killing it and you're in build mode of that first 1.0, I think inherently people give you more space, especially if you have clear visibility company-wide and it's a smaller company of, wow, that team or that person is really crushing it. You don't get encroached as much. But when the company gets larger and or performance starts to go down, then everyone implicitly assumes that there's a lot of room for improvement and maybe even starts to assume that they can do a better job on growth than you can. And that's a perfect storm because then what happens is, this is really hard to teach people that don't live in our world constantly, but you could surgically pick a point in the life cycle to run an experiment and you will have some kind of impact, direct impact from that experiment.
Yep.
Let's say you get a 5% conversion to purchase something. And they're thinking, oh, wow, that's incremental stuff, right? That's incremental.
Yep.
What could really be the situation is you just pissed off 95% of people and or muddied some other, part of that space. And the effects won't be clear until like later on downstream. And
Yep.
And if you are in an organization where everyone has fair dibs and it's just democratized at scale, then you have this happening all the time. It's what I call like a scorched earth situation. And nobody knows because it's not very easily provable, but your ceiling for success and the consistency and the TLC, the level of care, it just all suffers. And not to mention, you're going to have turnover of the person in that position because people like us and in lifecycle at large, more times than not, genuinely care a lot about the customer and are very protective mother hens. And
100%.
You start to mess with that relationship, and at some point, it becomes not worth it anymore.
Yeah, there's nothing like needing to hit quarterly goals that makes every team somehow magically want to send blast emails. Like, I don't know why, dude, that's where people's heads go. Like, we need to send an email. And then, like, the mother hen, like, I started chuckling when you said that because, like, that's just so true. As a lifecycle person, I'm so protective of the experience. I'm like, no, that's a bad idea. But it's like, but we need to hit our goal. But it's like, but the long-term effects. But since it's, like, not provable immediately, it's so hard to, like, make the numbers case. You know what I mean?
I shouldn't generalize too much because I'm sure there's people, and I hope to do these interviews at scale now. Like, I hope to bring in some people that are just loving their job and are in the flow, like what we talked about. That's the best. And like you mentioned it, like you're still loving what you do and you're working with it. Sounds like great.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to say it's a majority situation, but I do want to give a warning shot that I'm concerned for larger organizations that this job is going to be less desirable sooner rather than later if we don't kind of stick up for ourselves and or try to figure out the narratives of how to actually educate cross-functionally and upstream of why more protection of these decision makers and teams is necessary to achieve a very ambitious vision.
Yeah. It's about being intentional with how you structure things and then the metrics you put in place. I have a friend who she did marketing at, I'm not going to name this, but a huge retail brand. They had an email team and an SMS team, and they didn't work together. They both were just responsible for hitting an SMS number and an email number. That's bad because on the other end, you have people who maybe subscribe to both getting email stuff and SMS stuff, and those not playing nicely together, right? But that's not the fault of the people on the teams, and it's not even a knock on like, oh, we're spamming people. I don't know, like none of that. It's the structure's bad. The structure's bad. It's that they're two separate teams. Make them one team and give them a shared metric. So I think the opportunity, the reframe here is like the opportunity is to be intentional with structure for your company and align, put the right incentive metrics in place, and then let people loose. But being really intentional about that, I think, is the opportunity and the win that can solve a lot of these like problems that are keeping people from doing their best work.
And that's a perfect place to do a final plug. Just like honestly, bring in a lifecycle marketing coach like Brian if you want to up level your team, your strategy, poke holes. Like it could be very narrow scope at first, but help us help you just improve the quality of the role and the overall impact of the program.
And I know if you're watching this that you already follow Drew and his stuff, but it's most thoughtful thinking in the lifecycle marketing space, just period. So I think everyone should just jump at the chance to work with you, man. So jump at the chance to work with Drew. And yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been really fun chatting about all this stuff.
Likewise. Let's do it again sometime, man.
Definitely.
All right. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Drew.